We are currently recording. Enjoy the class.
All right, well, hello everyone, and thanks for being here today. I hope you have enjoyed this book on whitewalling and the issues that it raises. We're looking forward to really active discussion today. Our discussion leader is Nancy Lash, who is also a member of the Fine Arts Committee for HASP. She began her career as a graphic designer and program manager at Herman Miller, and then went on to become an art educator at Grand Valley State University and also at the College for Creative Studies in Detroit. So she continues to practice her art, though she is now retired from teaching. So I will turn it over to Nancy at this point.
Thank you, Sarah. Right, as Sarah said, I've taught at Grand Valley, and I also recently retired from College for Creative Studies in Detroit. If you're not familiar with it, we are located directly across the street from the DIA. In fact, we share their sculpture grounds is our campus. So I was living and working in Detroit for the last 11 years, and became very familiar with the community, obviously, and with some of the issues that people were sort of surrounded with. But this book in particular, Sarah contacted me last summer and asked me if I had read it and if I wanted to do something with it. And so I quickly got it and couldn't believe how pertinent it was at the time. And I think if you recall, last summer was a very tumultuous time in our history and in race issues. And I think for me, what happened, because I had just recently left Detroit, and I had made numerous friends in the Black community, but at all levels, by the way, from the janitor and the people serving me coffee up to my colleagues, more so than I certainly had at Grand Valley, and more so than I had in my early years when I did my undergrad work in Milwaukee. And I think as time goes on, we all evolve. I think we all change our opinions. But in this particular case, I really became much more aware of my what we call implicit bias, and how I view works of art. And I think as we get on to some of the other two topics, some of that will be more pertinent, perhaps. But right now, this particular piece, having the first article, Open Casket, which was part of the Whitney Biennial in 2017. Really brings to a head sort of everything that has been happening and is happening. For me, I think, again, it was extremely relevant. It brought back memories of many, many things. But then we also had the George Floyd issue, which we can watch on television right now going down. But again, I'm a white woman. How do I respond to this? And I think my feelings might have changed over the time. And I'm anxious to hear how you all feel about it. If you did read it, we'd like to go through some of these questions, but I really, more importantly, would like to hear your perspective. And let me just say one other thing. When Sarah asked me to do it, I was really hesitant because, again, at that time, the George Floyd sort of era was just coming to a head, and I had done a lot of reading at that point, and really had heard from a number of my friends in Detroit at all levels, and everything from "Don't cry for me" to here's how I really feel. So so it was just a very pertinent time that sort of changed my thoughts and feelings on how we make art and what we present as art and who makes it. But again, back to the issue of who presents this, I was really apprehensive because I was feeling very much about being sort of a privileged white woman, and how I might view this in a different light. But so again, I'm anxious to hear how all of you felt having read it. And so if we could just go maybe one by one, get a brief, your brief thoughts on just this summer and how you related to the book, and particularly this chapter. And then we can start bringing up some questions and answering some questions. Sarah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, sorry, were you asking me?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I found this first chapter very challenging on many levels. It raised so many issues, and in fact, it's kind of painful, actually. The emotions ran so high that I think it was a little difficult for the people to step back and really make a thoughtful response in some cases. But in any case, I did feel some sympathy for the artist. I think on the one hand, that her motives were honest, and that she apparently in her work, she often comments on things in modern culture. So that's sort of her approach. I think she probably should have been more aware of Emmett Till's the history of Emmett Till and his death, and how that was really a spark for the civil rights movement. This, it has enormous significance within the Black community in particular. And she probably was not as sensitive to that as she might have been. I think that was part of why it evoked such a huge response, was because of who Emmett Till was and what happened. And also then really the lack of justice following his death. So there were, a lot of emotions around that at the time and continuing. Anyway, that's my first take.
Anybody else want to share? Next on my screen is Rudy. Would you like to share some of your thoughts after having read it? I'm not sure whose name, if they're.
I'm Rudy.
Oh, okay.
I think I'll just hang in the background just a little bit and decide perhaps later to comment.
Okay, great. Sue.
Well, I think when I read it, and especially today with, she had depicted the white women and the people that convicted him and the judges and the injustice of it, that might have made a big difference, or the two men that did the killing. But it was just the devastation of this young man and the cruelty that had been he was exposed to was so telling. But if you're trying to tell a story with something, the whole story wasn't there, because he was unjustly accused by someone, and it was a white woman. The people that killed him were two white men. So I think you almost needed to juxtapose. So if you're going to do that kind of a painting, put more elements in it, and not just the young man, but show the connections between what they did and the result of it. That's what in my own mind. I'm definitely not an artist, so I can't depict any of that, but I think it didn't tell enough of the story. It just showed the devastation. And since lynching had been such a history in the South for so many years, this just kind of reiterated that it's continuing to go on, and without any justice for the family. So anyway, that was my thought about it. And initially when I read it and heard about it, I thought, well, I guess you can paint whatever you want. But I think in this context, this is such a highly charged story, and it's a Black story. And if you're going to tell it, you need to get all the components and the shortcomings of white people. And that's not shown here. It's
Okay.
If I could jump in on that point, Sue, first of all, I did not get the feeling that the artist was unaware of the whole story and the importance of it. But to me, the painting as it was of just the casket was as if it was a snapshot, as if it was the photograph that was shown in the newspapers. Very, very starkly. I totally agree that seeing the whole story would have been important, but I think that it had a big impact on me, and I had several problems. The idea that she created it for fun and money offended me, but I think throughout the book, because I've read the whole thing at this point, the role of the museum in making the selection to include it within the exhibit that it did, I think that deserved more emphasis in the story.
As you mean, as to why she painted it, or more emphasis on the details?
No, that it's kind of going into a second subject, is why the museum decided to include it in the exhibit as they did.
And I think that's the next thing we'll look at in depth. I think anybody else? Jean? My screen is probably different than yours in terms of who's next, but
I don't mind making a comment. My Zoom isn't cooperating and won't allow me to open up my video.
oh, okay, Beverly. Okay.
Yeah. I just, there was so many factors, as everyone has already said, coming out in that story, that I don't really have an opinion in a sense, because there's just so many right and wrong in a lot of ways, whether the museum should have displayed it, whether the artist should have painted it. But what it brings, again, the issue of we see through our own lens. And when you're looking through a white lens, we cannot look through a black lens. And the work, maybe she should have talked to the Black community and gotten some permission. Again, it's taking the Black body, the Black person, and owning it again, whether as slaves or you're owning it, and you don't ask. And I just, it seems to continue on. White people, they don't ask that. And again, it's the privilege, and you don't even think to ask. That's the privilege. But there are so many factors brought in, to the whole chapter, that it's hard to just pick one.
So many levels. Anybody else want to share anything? Any thoughts?
What did people think of the actual painting? I found it as disturbing as it was meant to be, I guess.
Well,
I sort of remember the postcards that people were making of the lynchings and that they would send out to their friends. And this sort of reminded me of that sort of thing, of almost like you were there or commemorating things or something. I don't know. It just didn't feel right to me, I guess. And especially since when people attended those lynchings, it was the family outing, and people would go and watch and cheer and take pictures and then send cards. And I don't know, this sort of reminded me of that tradition, and it just really felt uncomfortable.
I think, first of all, I want to go back to the fact that the Whitney Biennial happens every 2 years, and this was the first time in history that they used two people of another culture, non-white curators, to curate the show. So that was a sort of a historical event, and I think they felt they were moving forward by doing that. They were two Asian, people. But the idea behind the biennial is to choose works that have not necessarily been shown before, or to bring people in, works from people that have not really are not seen as much. Their work is not seen as much. But also to capture a snapshot of time of what's happening in America. One statement by the museum is that, look for my notes here, that the Whitney is what it means to be American. And so that was sort of the, every show sort of has a theme, and these individuals are invited to submit their work, and some people just submit their work. So, but they're not necessarily being chosen for their beauty. They're not necessarily chosen for even their statement as much as their work and their effort to communicate through their art. So how this all comes down, I don't know if you looked at some of the other images that were in the show. Many of them were equally as disturbing in terms of visual. It brings up the question, does art have to be beautiful? And over the last 100 years, we've seen art really move from what we used to consider to be very pleasant, beautiful images to more challenging, thought-provoking, push the envelope sort of statements. So I think this show really represented that in many ways. And this piece, if you looked at the whole show, this piece was just sort of demurely sitting in the back of the show, not even a prominent place. But individuals looking at the show really locked onto it. And the fact that it was a white woman painting a very disturbing image from a time 66 years ago that happened, by the way. And Emmett Till was in fact brutally mutilated and hung. And I guess just and to his mother wanted very much to have that open casket, and she made an agreement with the funeral home. She promised not to open the casket, but still have a public funeral. But in the end, she couldn't live with herself. She wanted the world to see what had happened to her son, and what unjust event happened to this young man. And by the way, not so long ago, it was revealed that the woman, he was hung, this happened because he supposedly made advances. He was 14 years old. He made advances to a white woman in a grocery store. But it was revealed not too long ago. She said, no, he didn't. It was all for naught, that he hadn't done that at all. And I think Dana may have locked onto that. She probably knew more about the story than she's revealing. In fact, did anybody listen to her statement? She states that she felt that she wanted to express, sort of capture what was happening in race relations at this time through some kind of a message, and that was the message that she locked onto. So I think it brings up the question, does she have a right as a white woman? Was it her role to paint this painting?
There's a comment in the chat that Dana painted 56 years after the incident. So
Mhm.
her art perspective was daring and wide open for judgment.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to point that out.
Somebody, yes, and then do you all agree? Yes, Charlotte.
Well, I'm the one who wrote the statement,
Okay,
and
thank you.
I would tread very, very lightly now. I think because I'm not the age Dana it was or is. But I did experience the Holland Public Schools in my time of 35 years of teaching, where we had first the Vietnamese and the Cambodians, and we've never had that many Black students in our public school. But I do remember, this was middle school, just learning by relating to the gal sitting at a table. Don't try to be cozy and don't ever touch or, so the sensitivity over the years and now what's happening across our country. Well, Dana Schultz was bold, to say the least. That's all I would offer.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I would agree. I don't think she did it with the intent to start a firestorm in the manner in which she did. But it was the Black community viewing the image that, or an individual, young man, in fact, that was first outraged by it. And he began a protest of repeatedly coming to the museum. But a woman by the name of Hannah, gotta look at my notes here. She penned a letter to the curators. And where's my, Hannah Black is her name. She's an artist and a writer. And she penned a letter asking for the painting to be destroyed. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, now we know a white woman did it. I can't say whether she had the right to do it. I think there are all kinds of questions at that level. Who has the right to express themselves? But
I don't think you have the right to tell anybody to destroy their artistic expression, because that's their feeling about what they're doing.
Mhm.
Whether it gets mounted in a huge museum, that's another story. But I think that's like, can you do the chalk in front of your driveway? I think if the freedom of speech, we sort of have the freedom to express. So I don't know. I think asking it to be destroyed was kind of an overreach. It seemed to me anyway.
Anybody else?
I agree.
I agree as well. Yeah,
Yeah,
I just
I
think
do
that was
too.
taking
Yeah.
it too far. I guess I'm still even a bit concerned with the notion of, there were suggestions of removing it from the show, if
Yes,
not
right.
destroying it.
Correct, yeah.
And I'm still a little concerned about that too. I think, it in some respects, it goes along with our discussions about whether to remove the statues of Confederate generals and so forth and other figures. And I think we need to give more context to these things. In case of the Confederate statues, I certainly don't mean that we should honor people who were fighting for the cause of slavery, but I wish we could put more context with some of these images rather than taking them away from view completely.
That was my comment, and maybe it was in the chapter, I just don't remember, but if there was no context other than this painting hanging there with a title and the artist's name, if there was no context about what happened to Emmett Till and the people who accused him and that kind of thing, then I think the museum is at fault.
Interestingly enough, Dana later on, after a number of campaigns against it. She changed the title and changed the description, the descriptor to include more of it. So, you know, some of their actions had some had some results. She refused to talk, though, openly about it in many forums that were had by a number of the critics and the people that were protesting. She refused to address them as well. I think it begs the question, who has the right? You know, is this cultural appropriation for her to take the subject of a Black man, but it was a white men were the perpetrators of the event. So was it wrong in that regard? Earlier, one of you mentioned that you thought she had done it for the sake of making money or having fun. I don't think she did it for the sake of having fun. I'm not sure she enjoyed the process. But was she exploiting the community through this statement?
Yeah, that was part of Hannah's letter.
Mm-hmm.
It is not acceptable for a white person to transmute Black suffering into profit and fun, though the practice has been normalized for a long time. And as a student, I'm a little confused with myself, I guess, because as a student of art history and a member of the Detroit Art Museum for way over 50 years, I haven't thought of this issue before or heard of this issue before of cultural misappropriation. And so this was that's probably why I was as upset as I was with the reading of that chapter. Is this something that's been there before? Is this a new issue?
First of all, let me just say, I don't think it is. I can think back to my days in college in the 70s in Milwaukee, meeting the Black community in art and having a young man take me by the hand, literally, and show me what he perceived to be Black art, and how it differed from anything that we were doing. I went to a college, Cardinal Stritch College, a Catholic university in Milwaukee. Very white bread. But I thought, so I think those issues have long been in place. And I don't know that we were we as an art community, I don't know that we were using cultural appropriation in terms of the Black community as much then. But I don't want to get off the subject, but if you even look at the inspiration of some African fabrics, we jump off from some of those and create some really lovely fabric designs. But is that appropriation or is that inspiration? So I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but I know it's a question that has circled the art world for many years. And I think it's only recently being discussed openly, perhaps. Anybody else have any thoughts on that? Another interesting point here is, I think that it wasn't, the protests were largely age related more than race related in the beginning. They were young people that were that were coming to this point and protesting more so than the Black community was in the very beginning. Do you see that as hopeful in our society, or not? Do you see that with any meaning at all? Oh, you're Charlotte, you're on mute.
Well, I see it as hopeful because they are very interested. At least I assume someone who's interested in art is probably an educated or has a perspective that might make them open. So yeah, very. That's not me.
I know what it is. Yeah. Yeah.
Were these young white people, you're saying? To begin?
I think there was a mix.
Okay.
I think it was a mix of, I think Bright himself who started it was a Black young man, but yeah, and he commented that no one should be making money off of off of a Black dead body. I think I mentioned before we started that I think that this was really a tempest in a teapot in terms of what's going on right now in relationship to it can just goes on and on, the abuse by the police to young Black men, and this only brought it to a head. But it really speaks to our culture and our society at this point. As far as what we will tolerate and what we won't tolerate, and what we feel is appropriate or not appropriate.
I'm sitting here, I'm not of the art world at all. But when you speak, I guess I don't look at that painting necessarily just as a painting or an art piece. It's like when you talk about Black art or fabric and the design, I see it, it's a person, it's a body. I don't know how to explain what I'm trying to say, but I don't see it just as an art piece. I don't compare it to appropriating fabric or something or whatever of Black works. Yeah. And also when the statues were brought up, the statues were put in place during Jim Crow to basically remind Black people about Jim Crow. They weren't necessarily put up right after the Civil War to commemorate anybody. So they have a whole different connotation. And then when you had mentioned about destroying the art, we've been sweeping this under the rug for 400 years. I don't think it should be destroyed. It's coming out in the open. This isn't anything new by any means. It's just that we have video cameras now taking the pictures. This has been going on forever, for a long time. And so bringing it out, hopefully will produce some positive results, and talking about it like we are today, particularly among white people. I mean, we do need to talk about this and acknowledge it to the degree that we can. And Nancy, I appreciate you being in the Detroit area. I worked at receiving for years at the emergency room, and I would jog around the DIA and the Institute, all of that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right around.
Yeah, but until you're actually in that community,
yes,
and your friends and understand it and look through it, try to look through, share each other's lens and things, you really can't get the perspective. You just can't. I mean, it's so basic. I think a lot of you know from other classes, my husband's African American. There's a difference when we're in the car together and he's driving and I'm driving. I mean, it's just a fact. It is what it is.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to just look at that painting as just art. I see it kind of differently. I see it as a young boy that was tortured and killed. And I understand it was because he whistled, actually. And his mother said that she had taught him to whistle because he had a stutter. And when so she doesn't know if that is what happened or what, but anyway, that's what it was about. And I think it was the husband of the woman, one of them, that did part of the killing. So I don't know if what I said made any sense, to be honest with you. My mind is ruminating in a lot of directions.
No, it did. I appreciate it. It is a very, very difficult subject. It's just, it's, as a painting, it's not a lovely image to look at. And in fact, it took me a long time, even as an artist, to get to read it, to get the perspective of the head and the body and the buttons on his shirt. Finally gave it away for me to be able to get a perspective of how she was looking. But then you see the actual photograph. But yeah, when I say, was she using the photograph as inspiration? But in fact, she really was, there's little jumping off from that photograph. She didn't, oftentimes when we create a piece, we go do research and we bring up different images, and it's called the inspiration wall, and you draw a little bit from here and a little bit from there to create a piece. But in this case, she just flat out sort of replicated the image in painting that was done in photography. So but in fact, in many ways, she was carrying out Mamie is Emmett's mother. And when Emmett's mother said, "I want the casket open, I want all the world to see what this white community did to my son," she 56, 66 years later, however many, she really brought it to the forefront again, and I think the discussion that was had was probably very healthy, but it's a different discussion. There are when you say so many levels, the issue of should the painting have been accepted into the biennial, and again, if you look at the reason for the biennial, it's to represent artists that are making a statement about a snapshot in time, what is happening. So in that regard, she was really bringing to the forefront what was happening on the national level. And if you listen to what she has to say, she actually does. She says that too. But then on the other hand, how does the Black community feel about a young white woman doing paintings of that out of the Black culture? So did she use it as inspiration? Perhaps if she had changed the image in a way, or as Sue said, maybe had some other icons in there to represent the event in a different way, it might have told the story a little better. But it certainly was effective. You have to admit that. It brought up conversation. So, anybody else want to express their thoughts? Sorry, I'm reading some of the questions here.
I think one of the interesting points that was made by one of the other people commenting was that they really wanted to see whites move beyond viewing Black pain and really taking some responsibility for the shameful history of the past and the shameful treatment of Black citizens, and taking some action, some, something more positive. And so I felt that was quite a compelling point that, again, it's not even enough just to listen. I think there was some concerns about when the museum staff, oh, we're here to listen. And even that wasn't satisfying. I mean, people were asking for something that was much more action oriented in addressing racial issues, I think. And that helped me understand the anger, I think, that so many were expressing, that this in addition to just the content of the painting, they were really asking for much more from white society.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. It certainly is a difficult question.
Nancy?
Yeah.
They're getting some feedback, and I'm wondering if it might be coming from you because it's happening when you were speaking. Do you have anything maybe electronic touching your computer? Sometimes that happens.
I have it plugged in.
Okay. Every once in a while, like a wire will touch another wire, but otherwise, I think you're good now. It just seems to be happening periodically. I don't know who it is.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
But go ahead.
I unplugged it, so I was charging it.
Okay.
Yeah, Gabe, did you even like the painting? Was it something that you when you saw the painting, were you able to see what the image was and recognize what it was, or anybody?
Certainly wouldn't have if I hadn't seen the title. But I certainly can't say that I liked it. That would not be the proper expression. But I think it made an impression on me that of what was intended, of remembering the horror and remembering that Emmett's mother wanted that casket open to show the white world what was happening to their community. So I feel that standing alone, if you forget about the issue of who painted it and whether it was in the exhibit or not, I found it was a very compelling piece.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that? Given that artwork today is generally has well, not all, but works that are at that level in New York and biennials in Vienna generally are about statements. They're not intended to be beautiful, but they are intended to make the viewer respond and make the viewer respond emotionally to the piece. And I think in that regard, it was very successful. From her perspective, she certainly did start a dialogue that went well beyond just looking at the work of art. So I think she had I think she was successful actually in what she did. I keep going back to the question now. Was it her world to do that? Was it her, should she have been the person to do that? And maybe just let me bring up another sort of correlation. Are any of you familiar with Picasso's Guernica?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. Picasso painted that painting in black and white, and it was about the Spanish Republic, the war. And although he was Spanish, in that regard, I suppose he had a cultural right to paint it. But what he painted was a very horrific scene. If you bring it to mind. And in that regard, I kind of had thoughts of the Guernica while I was reading this, and his work as bringing being a very horrific image, and being his image. I don't want to get too far off here. Was about the Spanish War and all the carnage that had happened. So he expressed that in his work. But I suppose in his historical or cultural background, he had the right to do that, although I don't know that he was there. So sorry, just thought I'd bring a
But
little
I think
correlation in.
I've seen that painting twice in
Mhm.
Spain, and I think one thing when you see that, it tells a story. And I think that really made people more aware what was happening in Spain after they saw that painting. I mean,
Mhm.
it really did a cultural awareness for the rest of the world. And so, and that it's very moving. It's a huge, huge painting. It's black and white, but there's, it's obviously a modernistic painting, but it just shows the terror of the time. And I don't think that people were really aware of what was happening in Spain that way worldwide. So I don't know how much that painting was shown around the rest of the world, but it certainly was an eye opener for people that weren't aware. And so um, I think that one did tell a story. I don't like the idea though that we can choose what people can produce and not produce, because then we have the same thing in literature and art and music. Is it okay or is it not okay? And who's to judge? I mean, I think that's a hard thing. Once you say you eliminate things because you don't think they're correct, then who's going to be the judge of those things? And that gets really very, very sticky. So it's really hard. I don't, this is
Yeah.
not an easy answer to any of this. And so.
Yeah, I thought the comments or the references back to an earlier generation of Black artists too, that they resisted being boxed in and being seen only as Black artists and as though they were the only ones who could speak about Black culture or Black issues. And they resented that, actually. They felt that was limiting.
Mhm.
You know, there is kind of that tension. Who does have the right to speak and when? And this just raised that again, of course, but.
All right,
Mhm.
question. We just finished American Dirt for a book group here in Chicago, here in in Hinsdale and also here. And that book is written by a Caucasian woman whose great grandmother, I believe, was Puerto Rican. The rest of the family is Caucasian. And she wrote American Dirt, which is about the migrants trip through Mexico and coming from San Salvador all the way up into the US. And she was given a huge, I'm sorry, money to, I've got a dog here too, money to write the book. She researched it for 4 years and it was just about to be published. And all of a sudden the whole world said, oh, but you can't write about that. You didn't live it. You don't know what you're talking about. And that goes right along with what's going on in the art world. You know, if it isn't yours culturally, then how dare you do that? So,
Well, just from your perspective, what do you think? Does she have a right to write the story? I think I know what the book you're talking about. But does she have a right to bring that forward if she hadn't actually taken the journey in the same respect here?
But there are many writers who've told that same story,
Mhm.
who are of Hispanic or Latino descent, and they don't get huge money from publishers. So that was one issue for me. You know, why were these other books, which were equally, if not better than hers, and more genuine to me, why are they ignored by the publishing world because the author has a Spanish name?
Yeah. Well, I had a correlation there, and it slipped. So, so I want to.
But with such a modern painting, as Schultz said, she labeled it, she wanted it known that she painted it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it could have been left more vague. I don't know. I don't know the American Dirt story either. But you're talking about Ann Weller, and I can't say the other name, but.
Well, whoever mentioned it first gave a good description of what it is. And as I say, it almost duplicates some other books on the same subject that I've read by Latin authors. And so to have her paid so well for doing it as a white person was questionable.
Well, and then the controversy about it put it on the bestseller list for a while on the New York Times bestseller list. So that was really interesting, but the controversy about whether she should write or not, all of a sudden got all kinds of people buying it. So it really was an interesting phenomenon for sure.
Well, I think, and likewise, the controversy surrounding the Whitney show drew attention and drew people to the gallery. But one thing that was noted is that that it wasn't the painting itself represented the Black culture and the horrific things that have happened. It sort of was a one image representing a whole lot of events, but who got to see it, and who is the audience, and really the audience was the upper, probably the upper middle class, high end people in New York who frequent the museum, but it was noted that the entrance fee is $22, and many people couldn't even afford that to go see the painting. So they weren't really being represented even in that way. So what was the message and what was the result? I don't know that there was anything positive. Well, I can't say that. So I'm kind of looking at some of my thoughts here.
I would throw out, I think there were some references in there to being allies, and can whites effectively be allies with the Black community in bringing about change? I mean, is that a fair question?
Mm-hmm.
I think perhaps Dana Schutz thought she was doing that kind of thing. And I suppose there are helpful allies and unhelpful allies, maybe.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to know, I mean, how do you go about this to be an ally and combat injustice where you see it? What's the best approach? What's the best mindset for that?
Well, to me, I used to kind of like the word allies, and I don't as much anymore, because I think what whites need to do is look at how they've created racism instead of being an ally to the people that they've created racism against, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And I've heard people talk about standing with the marginalized. I mean, white people, we stand with the marginalized. Well, don't stand there. Do something so people are not marginalized.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So is there a better word to use?
Pardon me?
Is there a better word to use besides ally?
Doing our own work would be one. I mean, that's several words, but so I don't know if there's like a single word or that I could suggest at the moment anyway.
It is,
But I mean, I think, you know, are there white painters who are painting racism as created by whites?
I expect there are, but we're just not, that was a good question. And we maybe should have looked at some to see if there were some equal images out there.
Or were there any at the Whitney that
In the event, no. Not that I can recall. There were 63 63 images. They weren't all paintings. They were, you know, sculptures, happenings, and all kinds of things. There's a young woman from Detroit that had a piece that was displayed near hers, but it was a video. What she did was go around and literally dance in downtown Detroit, and to sort of get the reaction of the community and the people that were walking by at the time. I recognize a lot of the neighborhood. And that was interesting, but this is clearly a difficult topic, and I don't have an answer for this. I did consult some of my friends at CCS, and really got back, oh yeah, I read it. And I didn't get any solid responses from anybody in that regard. So I think it's very difficult to wrap your arms around. And it's, you know, who makes a decision as to what goes in a show or not is left to the curators, and they're looking at the work from, and you know, does it meet their criteria? Does it make a statement? Is it a statement about contemporary culture at this time? And it met all those things. So I don't know, but I can't. You can't say for sure that they did not bring it in to be controversial. It clearly is a controversial image, but they chose to include it in their collection for at that time. So does anybody else have any thoughts? I thought I thought people would have far more thoughts on the image.
Nancy, do you think that this controversy has changed how curators approach these kinds of shows? Do you think that changed anything?
No, I do not. I do
Mm.
not. I really don't. I think, you know, we talk about implicit bias. It's what we're not really aware of, what we have lived and experienced, and how that comes through in our actions without even being intentional. I think we can relate that to the curators of exhibits. I don't know that they intentionally make some of these sort of controversial, but on the other hand, I think they probably do. Artwork is not always beautiful. It's not always easy to see, but neither is literature easy to read, nor is it easy to digest or understand. So by those tokens, I think that curators will go on and make the same kind of choices. Whether they do it explicitly or implicitly, it's hard to say, but I don't think it made any difference. I don't think it changed anything from the curator point of view. Did it change society in any way? Did it help bring the conversation to the forefront? Do we understand the issue a little more and who we are in that regard? I think maybe it did, but that's for us to say. What, do you have any thoughts on that? Anybody?
Isn't the book just published in 2018. So it's quite a recent book.
It is, yes.
And I don't know how long it takes for books to impact, but it's quite soon to be really answering that question
Okay, okay.
on curators and how they're going to select. And because
Mhm, mhm.
our country is changing over this issue daily. We're seeing results of it.
Well, does what's happening now with the George Floyd thing, does it make you view this any differently?
Yeah. What's happening as a result and applying that to a painting
Mhm,
is a very hard comparison to me.
okay.
I think the result of all of it, whether it's the painting, that book, American Dirt, George Floyd, the young man that was killed yesterday by the police outside of Minneapolis,
Mhm.
it's all brought discussion
Yeah.
and it's brought light. So I just hope and pray that something can move forward with that. Because before there's lots of denial, again, brushing under the rug, ignoring it, not making attempts to remedy. And the fact that there's so much pushback, whether it's changing voting laws, whatever, it shows that are changes going on, or the pushback wouldn't be quite as strong. And so many white people, particularly white males, wouldn't feel so threatened by people of color. And that's what I see this pushback coming from. So if nothing else, I think the more it's talked about, I hope it doesn't lead to more divisiveness, and rather it opens people up to dialogue and relationship, whatever that relationship is.
I think what I see now is so much fear of the other, and police shooting into a car when they just stop someone and they drive away. It just seems like so much overreaction. And the same way with a young man in Virginia that was an army officer, and had a new car and actually had the sticker on the back of his car saying he had proof of license, and then they're pepper spraying him and giving him other chemicals. And when you're not doing anything wrong, and you're being treated like that, I mean that's it's just an increasing awareness. And why are our policemen so afraid of young black men, that they're so dangerous? I mean, I guess that's the thing that really troubles my mind, because there's such an overreaction to the other, when it's a non-threatening situation. And
Well, is
we
it
really
just,
need to deal with that as a community. And we need to teach our children um, different mores about that. And I know I was taught as a young girl to be afraid of black men because they were big and strong, and it's not necessarily true. And so we need to change that thought process in our country, because it's carrying over into all aspects of life, and it's really become it's a dangerous thing for everyone. And it's just not a good thing.
uh, the issue of the police, it's not only black men. When I was working at CCS, I headed the department, and my assistant was a black woman, middle-aged. And she came into work one day and she said she got a speeding ticket, and on, I don't know, 696 or one of the highways there. And I just said, oh, and she said, yeah, I knew I shouldn't. I saw the cop sitting on the side of the road. She said, I knew I shouldn't look him in the eye as I drove by. And at that point, and myself and another colleague, a white woman, just looked at each other and thought, really? Maybe you were speeding. But as time went on, I realized that she was just right. bias against the Black community as a whole, particularly from the police department, was is out of sync. It's out of control probably. So I think, you know, maybe we're getting off the subject here, but I think it certainly does exist. And again, I don't have an answer for that. But it does it makes us feel uncomfortable. The painting makes us feel uncomfortable. The subject makes us feel uncomfortable. We can't talk about it. We can't talk about it well. We can't express our thoughts and our feelings about it. And with that, just simple idea, we have a lot of work to do, I think, in our community, across the country as a whole. Difficult.
I think we should feel uncomfortable. I think we should feel a lot more than uncomfortable, and should have for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And at least we have Germany to compare on how they were so prejudiced against a certain part of their society, and how they have come to terms, the younger generations. There's some hope there, and we have so far to go to make that progress.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would recommend the book Cast if you have not read it,
Yeah.
By Isabel Wilkerson, who talks about the United States, Germany, and India, and the caste system, which we think we don't have here. But it's an excellent book and very readable. She won a Pulitzer Prize for her last one, The Warmth of Other Suns. And years ago, she spoke in Holland. She's a very dynamic speaker. So it's a wonderful book.
I lived in Evanston, Illinois for 40 years, and I'm proud to say they are giving reparations now to the Black community there. For many years, the Black community wasn't allowed to go to the community hospital. They had a special Black hospital. And so they're giving people that $25,000 to help buy property. And they have a system set up now, depending upon what years you were there in the city. And I don't know if that's the first city in the US to do that, but I'm very happy that I can say I lived there for many years. And they're one of the first cities to start optional busing of schools in the late 50s. So anyway, so people individually, I mean, our country isn't willing to do that yet, but a community can make those changes and try to make up for past indiscretions. So it's nice to see that's happening there.
And some are rethinking their police departments. I just read about one that was removing qualified immunity, that, you know, police can't be sued and so on. And others are thinking about what, quote, defunding the police might mean, which isn't taking away all of their money, but is adding social workers or mental health specialists to respond instead of police with guns drawn at certain situations. And hopefully that will continue.
Well, again, it's a difficult subject. So,
Nancy, can I ask a quick question? Not being of the art world,
yeah.
is the art world a place where social issues and things are presented? I mean, is that
Yes, I
one of
think
the roles?
particularly over the last 100 years or so, they have, as we started making works of art that were that are intended for the viewer to respond emotionally to, or thought-provoking pieces, events and that sort of thing. I think, yeah, social work. Oh, you go back to Ben Shahn in the 50s. He I don't know if you're familiar with him, but his work was all about showing what was going on in particular neighborhoods. He would do printing, woodcuts and things like that, and art and black and white prints. or even going to the controversial trials and things that couldn't be telecast or broadcast. He would do drawings of the subject matter, and he would bring that to the public for purely for it was called social. Actually, there's a category of work paintings in that or artwork in that category that are really intended to bring what's going on in society to the attention of society. So yeah, it's very much a part of the art world. Yeah, so I think the issue is not so much what the subject matter was, but who did it. And it keeps coming back to who has a right, who does the image belong to? Because his mother took the photograph and let the journalist publish it. And she opened the casket so you could see, but she wanted the world at large to see what had happened to her boy. You know, it might have died down over the last 50 so years. Actually, that event, certainly we've had more and more, even more and more recently. So it allowed these things to come back to the forefront. And it's things that probably we as a white society, I'm sorry, I'm going to make a generalization here, but we don't want to see, we don't want to hear, we don't want to talk about it. So it's a difficult subject, but the Black community said she didn't have a right to do it. She did not have a right to bring that forward. So, you know, I don't have an answer, certainly. And I was anxious to hear what your perspective might be on that. Oh, you're Charlotte, you're on mute.
No, I was looking at the last question. Do artists have the right to include subject matter of other cultures in their work? Well, good, we need that. Yes, they have the right.
Why do you think the Black community was so vehement against her doing it then? Sorry.
And it built up such an anger and resentment, even the tiniest effort, because I've found a resentment that I couldn't believe, but didn't understand. And I felt it personally, but it wasn't done personally.
I'm sorry, you felt a resentment for her doing it? Yeah.
Well, of sharpness and unfriendliness. When you get to know them, or you know they're in a situation that's hard, can't let their guard down. There's reasons, and we understand it mostly.
I would share, if you don't mind, my personal experience of regarding racism. I was working in the University of Michigan library when I was a student there one afternoon in 1968, when a young Black woman came up to me right in my face, crying and shaking her hands and very upset, and said, "You killed him, to me." And she was referring to the death of Martin Luther King Jr. And that experience has stayed with me because I'm not a white supremacist. I have lived in integrated neighborhoods. I actually went to, Nancy, you might be familiar with this. I was bused to Tappan Junior High School, which was a Black junior high school in Detroit. And, you know, I was the face of the tragedy that had happened in this girl's eyes. And it was devastating. It was a devastating experience to me.
Yeah, just I don't want to get off into that world, but I did part of my job responsibility was to oversee. We had a charter school on our campus, and it was an art-driven school. We had art in every single grade, K through 12, and it was my responsibility to oversee the that art program and what was being done. And I would walk in, you know, again, it's the white privilege that I probably had, but that was given to me by the young students in the school. They would just get out of the way, you know, and here she comes, you know, because I was the head of the program, not for any other reason, but it was difficult. Our teachers were being tested if I hired a white teacher, and I don't know, I can just go into all kinds of stories. It was a wonderful, deep experience, and I don't want to say that it was bad because I loved it and I gained a tremendous amount from it. But it was a difficult journey. So I have to ask: do I have a right to do some artwork expressing that? And I honestly, I wish I knew the answer. I don't have the answer. I was somewhat offended when I saw the painting, by the way, personally, in that Dana did, not because she did it, but just because of what the image was. And it was such a harsh image at this time, and why was it included? I think that's a question we have to look at. Why? But then when I listened to her speak, she explained that she was trying to encapsulate all of the horrors that were happening at this time in 2017. By the way, it was immediately after the United States elected, not to get political here, but one of probably the most white supremacist presidents we've ever had. So so it was a difficult time, and that was on her mind, and she wanted to bring that to the forefront. But it was not clearly not welcome as she did it. So are there any other thoughts? I thank you.
Well, it certainly is part of America.
Mm-hmm.
So from that standpoint, you know, we don't just need beautiful landscapes and pretty people and, you know, as though that represents all of America, because it doesn't.
I think she has the right to do the painting, but the Black community also have the right to rebel against the fact of another white person taking the body of a Black person. The ownership again issue. Black bodies have been owned by white people, and in some ways, with suppression of so much over the many years that and continues, that I can understand why there'd be a reaction to it, because that image is owned by the Black community in a sense. And so, I mean, I get both sides of it, but I think she has the right to paint it also, if that's, you know, and they have the right to display it. It's just expect the outcomes that's going to happen when that, you know, when that happens.
Yeah.
Can I ask another question, Nancy? I'm
Yes,
sorry, I'm
please do.
talking so
Please
much.
do.
Well, there was something mentioned, and I haven't looked back at the article about the Whitney relocating, and then something got brought up about regenification. Is that something, an issue with the Whitney? The gentrification that they moved their
Oh,
location
is there
in New
bitterness
York or
against the
something?
Whitney for, yeah, gentrifying the neighborhood?
Right.
You're right, that was, I recall that. I think it's the Whitney as a whole, what it represents in terms of high-end art, expensive art, cost to get in. Do they serve the community that they're located in? And those are issues that that are ever present. I think the DIA has the same issues, although they have made tremendous strides in including the people in the community to participate in events there. So, but yeah, I think there is some bitterness in terms of building big, tearing down housing of whatever it might be, and building large buildings that begin to gentrify a neighborhood. Yeah, I think there is something to that. But I'm not sure that was a big part of this issue at hand. So,
Yeah, I lived in Manhattan and went to nursing school there way back
Mhm.
then. And I do remember I couldn't afford to get in the Whitney.
right,
The
right,
Metropolitan didn't cost anything, but I couldn't go to the Whitney.
right. Mhm.
Well, I think the
Um,
Whitney is right at the beginning where the High Line walking
Yeah.
trail is
yeah.
now.
Mhm.
And it's I think it's Soho, isn't it, where it's located? Anyway, I've been there twice in the last 5 years or so, and it's a beautiful museum, but it has changed the neighborhood quite a bit in terms of the real estate and the cost and all the other things when you
Mhm.
put a museum there. So
Well, Dana has said in her words that it's better to engage in a subject matter and fail than it is to not try at all. So I, in that regard, she was, somebody said earlier, she was brave and bold, and I agree that she was. To do the painting. The curators felt it was appropriate for the time and for the event, and that it deserved recognition. And so they included it in the show. I think the museum itself, and maybe they have over the last couple of years, I haven't really done a lot of research, but they need to do something to involve that community perhaps a little more, and do it in a more intentional way. But maybe not. Maybe they are, they are what they are. They represent artwork that is being done today, and it's for us to decide whether we like it or not. What is good or not good is generally the conclusion of the body of professionals in a field. So it's generally curators respond to the professionals in the field, not the public. So they're choosing art amongst their population, as it were, which are artists. They're not choosing work to please the public or irritate the public in either way. So they make their decisions in that regard. But generally speaking, what happens with the people that are included in the biennials oftentimes go on to be highly recognized. simply, and it's not intentional. The Whitney will tell you they're not picking, they're not choosing artists that that they want to promote over a length of time. They're just picking work from what is currently on the market, or as it were. But so they're not trying to, they're not kingmakers, as it were. They're just picking works of art in their minds. Unfortunately, they wind up being kingmakers, I think, because we look at that and say, "Oh, you were in the Whitney, so you must be good," you know. So, but that's sort of off the subject right now. So, I'm sorry, Rudy, would you like to respond to what you've heard, or would you rather just let it go?
Lurk in the background.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
I want to be mindful of the time. It's
Okay.
we have been listening to the class in the background. It's been incredible dialogue and an exchange of ideas. I suppose I can allow the class to stay open and work in the background if you want to continue for a few minutes. It's kind of up to you.
Well, I think it's up to you. We're nearing the end. I think I'm still troubled by should she have done it, and should it have been included? I don't know that we've answered that question. I don't know that there is an answer. And that's what art's about. And that's contemporary art is definitely about that. So the next chapter is equally as challenging. I have some more personal responses in that one, in terms of people participating and people that have been included in those stories. But always a difficult topic. But I think so. Overall, what did you think of the book? Whitewalling, Art, Race, and Protests. Anybody?
I found it amazingly exciting to read this and to have this topic going on. And I only read the first assignment
So far? Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I'm very pleased to be exposed to this, and I look forward to reading and continuing.
Good, thank you. Yeah, I have to give Sarah the credit. She found the book and brought it to my attention. And I was deeply, deeply pleased with it. I have a lot of personal feelings about it, and responses and connections and people involved in some of these events that have happened. And it's a topic I think that's very close to my heart, as it were. I think this particular one was especially difficult, I have to admit.
Okay, looking forward to talking next week.
Yes, thank you. Anne, were you going to say something?
I just that I have read the entire book at this point,
Mhm.
and I think I found this first chapter the most challenging
Yes.
as far as what we would conclude or not be able to conclude, as you just said.
Yeah. Yeah. Does anybody have a thought? Is it right? Is it wrong? Who owns it? Who should? Who shouldn't?
I think the fact that we can't conclude is actually the point of it. So it did work.
Well, I think it's also interesting that it's so hard to talk about. Why is it so hard to talk about it? It's so difficult and challenging and so personal in many ways. I really resisted when Sarah asked me. I resisted a tremendous amount because I felt I wasn't the right person to lead the discussion because, I was a little white girl from Milwaukee. certainly I've had many experiences, and a lot of experiences and many, many friends, but I still didn't live the life. I didn't walk the journey. And how can I bring good insight into that other than having been a painter and illustrator for, God, 50 years. But other than that, I know the art world, but I don't know. Maybe we never know. So I do look forward to the next chapter. I will be hosting from Florida. I will be going down next Sunday to help my son and daughter-in-law with their new baby. So
Congratulations.
thank you. But I've already warned them and they said, no problem. We will, and my son and both of them work from home, by the way. So they said, we'll block out time so you can do it without having to have a crying baby on your arm. So I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.